The transport ship shuddered as it docked with Void Station Alpha. Jake Miller sat in his restraints, watching the alien guards through the reinforced glass. Their faces showed no emotion, but their body language told him everything he needed to know. They were afraid of him. The ship had traveled for 3 weeks through hyperspace to reach this place. Jake had spent most of that time thinking about the trial. The explosion at the mining facility on Centauri 7 had killed 12 alien workers. The prosecutors said he caused it. They said he was a terrorist from Earth, a Class 15 Deathworld where only the most dangerous creatures could survive. Jake knew the truth was different. He had been trying to save those workers when the gas leak happened. He had shouted warnings, in broken Centauri standard, trying to get them to evacuate. But when the translation came out wrong and the explosion followed seconds later, everything changed. The survivors thought he had triggered the blast on purpose. Now he was here, sentenced to life imprisonment in the worst prison in the galaxy. The docking clamps engaged with a loud clang. Jake felt the artificial gravity shift as the transport connected to the station. Through the small window, he could see the massive asteroid that housed the prison. It looked like a dead rock floating in space. But Jake knew better. Inside that rock were thousands of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. The door hissed open. 2 guards entered, their weapons drawn but not aimed directly at him. The first was tall and thin, with gray skin that looked like metal. The second was shorter but much broader, covered in what looked like living crystal formations. "Prisoner 847 Delta," the tall one said in mechanical-sounding galactic standard. "You will comply with all instructions." Jake nodded slowly. "I understand." The crystal guard stepped forward with the restraint removal tool. Jake could see surprise in his faceted eyes. Most prisoners fought or screamed or begged at this point. Jake just sat still and waited. The restraints fell away. Jake stood up carefully, keeping his hands visible. He was taller than both guards, which seemed to make them nervous. Humans were known throughout the galaxy for their physical strength and aggression. What the guards did not know was that Jake had spent his entire adult life working in dangerous places. He knew how to stay calm when others were afraid. "Follow," the tall guard said. They walked through a series of airlocks and corridors. Jake noticed that the gravity was heavier than standard galactic norm. The air had a bitter taste that made his nose burn slightly. These conditions would be torture for most species. For Jake, who had grown up breathing Earth's polluted air and working in high-gravity mining tunnels, it was just uncomfortable. They passed other guards along the way. Jake counted at least 6 different species. All of them stopped to stare at him. Word traveled fast in a place like this. The human from the Class 15 Deathworld had arrived. The corridor opened into a large processing area. Behind a thick barrier of transparent aluminum sat the duty officer. Jake could see immediately that this being was different from the others. 6 arms moved independently as he worked at multiple control panels. His reptilian head turned toward Jake, and golden eyes studied him carefully. "I am Chief Warden Zektar," the being said. His voice was deep and measured. "You are Jake Miller, human, age 32, convicted of terrorism and mass murder. You have been sentenced to life imprisonment without possibility of parole." "Yes, sir," Jake replied. Zektar leaned forward. "Do you understand where you are? Human? Void Station Alpha? Maximum security prison?" "More than that," Zektar continued. "This facility houses the worst criminals from 47 different worlds. Murderers, psychopaths, beings so dangerous that execution was considered too merciful. The average life expectancy for new prisoners is 14 days. Jake nodded. "I understand. Do you?" One of Zektar's hands gestured to a screen showing statistics. "In the past year, we have had 237 prisoner deaths, 43 suicides, 89 murders. The rest died from the environmental conditions or from simple despair." "I'm sorry to hear that," Jake said quietly. Zektar's golden eyes narrowed. You are sorry. Most prisoners beg for mercy or threaten revenge. You express sympathy for others. Jake shrugged. Death is always sad, no matter the circumstances. The warden studied him for a long moment. Then he activated a control panel. Very well. You will be assigned to cell block 7. The guards will explain the rules. Break them, and your already short life will become much shorter. The processing continued with biometric scans and equipment issue. Jake received a gray prison uniform that barely fit his human frame and a small hygiene kit. The crystal guard, who had introduced himself as Captain Veloth, led him deeper into the station. Block 7 is for the most dangerous prisoners, Veloth explained as they walked. The ones we cannot execute but cannot allow near others. You will have limited interaction with other inmates. They passed through several more security checkpoints. At each one, guards stopped their conversations to watch Jake walk by. He moved with the steady pace of someone accustomed to long shifts of physical labor. His breathing remained even despite the toxic air. His posture stayed relaxed despite the heavy gravity. Finally, they reached cell block 7. The corridor stretched ahead with dozens of heavy doors on either side. Most had small windows, but many were covered from the inside. Jake could hear various sounds, scratching, muttering, and occasional screams. Cell 47, Veloth said, stopping at a door near the end of the corridor. The lock disengaged with a series of clicks and hums. This is your new home, Jake stepped inside. The cell was 3 meters wide and 4 meters long. A narrow bed was built into one wall. A sanitation unit occupied one corner. A small shelf held a few basic items. There was no window, just a ventilation grate near the ceiling. Meal delivery is twice daily, Veloth explained. Recreation time is 1 hour every 3 days. Medical care is available for life-threatening. Emergencies only. Do you have questions? Jake looked around the small space. What time is lights out? Veloth seemed surprised by the mundane question. 2200 hours station time. Thank you. The door sealed shut with a final-sounding clang. Jake was alone. He spent a few minutes examining his new home. The walls were solid metal with no obvious weak points. The ventilation was adequate, but not comfortable. The gravity was about 1.3 times Earth normal. The air had a metallic taste with traces of sulfur compounds. Jake sat on the edge of the bed and removed his boots. Then he lay down on the thin mattress and closed his eyes. He could hear movement in nearby cells. Scratching sounds came from the cell to his left. Soft crying came from somewhere down the corridor. After a few minutes, he got up and began doing push-ups on the metal floor. The heavy gravity made each repetition more difficult, but Jake had done harder workouts in deeper, mine shafts. He completed 50 push-ups, then 50 sit-ups, then a series of stretches. From the corridor came the sound of footsteps. Jake looked up to see an eye watching him through the small window in his door. The eye belonged to a guard he had not met yet. After a moment, the footsteps moved away. Jake resumed his exercises. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he would prepare. His body needed to adapt to these conditions. His mind needed to stay sharp. Most importantly, he needed to remember who he was. He was not a terrorist. He was not a murderer. He was Jake Miller from Earth, and he had always tried to help others when he could. That would not change, even here. Jake had been in Void Station Alpha for 6 days when the first riot started. He was in his cell doing his morning exercises when the alarm began to sound. The light switched to red emergency mode, and he could hear shouting from the corridor outside. Captain Veloth's voice came through the communication system. All prisoners remain in cells. Any prisoner found outside their cell will be stunned and placed in isolation. Jake stopped his push-ups and listened carefully. The shouting was getting louder. He could hear different alien languages mixed together, most of them angry. There was also the sound of something heavy being thrown against walls. Through his door's small window, Jake could see guards running past. They wore full riot gear and carried energy weapons. Their movements showed they were experienced with this kind of situation, but Jake could also see the tension in their posture. The riot had started in Cell Block 5, according to what Jake could hear from the guard communications. A prisoner had died during the night, and the others blamed the guards for not providing medical care fast enough. Now dozens of prisoners were fighting guards and each other in the common area. Jake sat on his bed and waited. He had seen riots before in the mining camps. They usually burned themselves out when people got tired or hurt. The best thing to do was stay out of the way and help clean up afterward. But this riot was different. After an hour, the fighting spread to Cell Block 6. Then Jake heard something that made him stand up quickly. A guard was screaming for help and the voice was getting weaker. The emergency locks on his cell door had been engaged, but Jake noticed something the designers had not expected. The door was built for prisoners who would panic and try to break it down. It was not built for someone who understood how mechanical systems worked under stress. Jake examined the lock mechanism carefully. The emergency seal was electronic, but it had a manual backup that was supposed to only work from the outside. However, the backup system had a small gap where the heavy gravity of the station had caused some settling in the door frame over time. Using the handle from his hygiene kit, Jake was able to reach through the gap and trigger the manual release. The door opened with a soft click. Jake stepped into the corridor. The red emergency lights made everything look like the inside of a furnace. The sound of fighting was much louder now, and he could smell smoke from several directions. He followed the sound of the guard calling for help. 3 corridors over, he found the source. A young guard from a species Jake did not recognize was trapped under a heavy piece of furniture that had been thrown during the fighting. The guard's leg was bent at a wrong angle, and blue blood was spreading across the floor. The guard saw Jake approaching and tried to reach for his weapon. "Stay back, prisoner." "I'm here to help," Jake said calmly. He kept his hands visible and moved slowly. "You're hurt," I said. "Stay back." The guard's voice was getting weaker. Jake knelt down next to the furniture. It was a food preparation unit that weighed at least 200 kilograms. In the heavy gravity of the station, it would be even heavier. But Jake had moved equipment like this before in the mining tunnels. "What's your name?" Jake asked as he examined the situation. The guard hesitated. "Guard Nixara." "I'm Jake. I'm going to lift this off you, but I need you to pull yourself clear when I do." "Can you do that?" Nixara looked confused. "Why are you helping me?" "Because you're hurt, and I can help." Jake positioned himself at the best leverage point. "Ready?" Jake lifted the heavy unit with a grunt of effort. The increased gravity made it much harder, but his muscles had adapted over the past week. Nixara pulled herself clear, just as Jake set the furniture down safely. Jake quickly examined her injuries. The leg was broken, but not compound. She had lost some blood, but not a dangerous amount. She would need medical attention, but she was not going to die. "Can you walk?" Jake asked. "I don't think so." Jake looked around. The fighting was getting closer to their location. He could hear boots running in their direction. "I'm going to carry you to the medical bay." "No," Nixara said quickly. "If other guards see a prisoner carrying me, they'll shoot first and ask questions later." Jake nodded. "Good point. Is there a place nearby where we can wait for help?" Nixara pointed down the corridor. "Supply closet. It locks from inside." Jake helped her stand on her good leg, then supported her weight as they moved slowly down the corridor. Nixara was small compared to Jake, probably weighing about as much as a human teenager. She had gray-green skin and large eyes that seemed to see everything at once. They reached the supply closet just as a group of fighting prisoners came around the corner. Jake got Nixara inside and closed the door quietly. The lock engaged with a soft click. Inside the closet, Jake helped Nixara sit down against the wall. He found some clean cloth among the supplies and used it to stop the bleeding from her leg. Then he fashioned a simple splint using a metal rod and more cloth. "You know first aid," Nixara observed. "I worked in dangerous places before I came here. First aid was required training." Nixara watched Jake work on her leg. His movements were careful and gentle. "The other guards said humans are violent killers." "Some are," Jake replied. "Just like some members of any species. But most humans just want to live their lives and help their families." "You killed 12 people in that explosion." Jake's hands stopped moving for a moment. Then he continued working on the splint. "I was trying to save them. The translation system made my warnings sound like threats. When people are afraid, they sometimes hear what they expect to hear instead of what was actually said." Nixara was quiet for several minutes. Outside the closet, they could hear guards shouting orders and the sound of energy weapons being fired. "The riot was being brought under control. Why did you leave your cell to help me?" she asked finally. Jake tied off the splint and sat back. "Because you needed help and I was able to provide it." "But I'm a guard. I'm your enemy." "No," Jake said, quietly. "You're someone who was hurt. That makes you someone I should help if I can." Nixara stared at him with her large eyes. "I don't understand humans." "Most people don't understand each other very well," Jake replied. "We all grow up in different places with different experiences. What seems normal to one person seems strange to another." The sounds of fighting outside were getting quieter. Jake could hear Captain Veloth's voice, giving orders to secure different areas of the prison. The riot was ending. "They'll be looking for injured guards soon," Jake said. "Are you ready to be found?" Nixara nodded. "What will you tell them?" "The truth. I heard you calling for help, so I helped. They won't believe you left your cell just to help a guard." Jake shrugged. "Then they won't believe me. But it's still the truth." A few minutes later, they heard guards calling Nixara's name. Jake unlocked the door and helped her stand up. When the guards found them, they immediately pointed their weapons at Jake. "He helped me," Nixara said quickly. "I was trapped and injured. He got me out and treated my wounds." Captain Veloth arrived a few minutes later. He looked at Jake, then at Nixara, then back at Jake. "You left your cell during a riot to help a guard." "Yes, sir." "How did you get out of your cell?" Jake explained about the door mechanism. Veloth listened carefully, taking notes on a small device. "You could have escaped during the confusion," Veloth said. "Instead, you helped an injured guard and then waited to be found." "Where would I escape to?" Jake asked. "We're on a space station in the middle of nowhere." Veloth's crystalline features showed what might have been amusement. "Most prisoners don't think that clearly during riots." The medical team arrived and took Nixara away on a stretcher. As they loaded her onto the transport, she looked back at Jake. "Thank you," she said. Jake nodded. "I hope your leg heals well." Captain Veloth escorted Jake back to his cell. Neither of them spoke during the walk, but Jake could sense that the crystal being was thinking hard about something. At his cell door, Veloth paused. "The warden will want to speak with you about this incident." "I understand." "For what it's worth," Veloth said quietly. "Guard Nixara might have died if you hadn't helped her. Her species doesn't handle blood loss well." Jake nodded. "I'm glad. She'll be okay." Veloth locked the cell door and walked away. Jake returned to his exercises, but his mind was on the young guard and her confused questions about why he had helped her. The answer seemed obvious to him, but he was beginning to understand that obvious things to humans might not be obvious to other species. Outside his cell, he could hear guards talking in low voices as they cleaned up from the riot. Several times, he heard his prisoner number mentioned in their conversations. 2 weeks after the riot, Jake was moved to a different cell block. Chief Warden Zektar had decided that Jake was not as dangerous as his file suggested. The new cell was in Block 3, where prisoners were allowed more movement and some social interaction. Jake's first day in Block 3 started with breakfast in the common area. He carried his tray to an empty table and sat down quietly. The other prisoners stared at him but kept their distance. Word had spread about the human who had helped a guard during the riot. At the table next to him sat 3 insectoid beings from the Kythera species. They were small, about the size of human children, with thin arms and large compound eyes. Jake could hear them talking in their clicking language, but he also noticed that they seemed very nervous. Their hands shook as they tried to eat, and they kept looking around the room as if expecting danger. After breakfast, Jake was assigned to work detail in the station's hydroponics bay. The work was simple, checking water levels and nutrient mixtures for the plants that provided fresh food for the prison. Jake found the work relaxing after years of dangerous mining operations. Guard Rontal supervised the work detail. He was from a species that looked like giant bears covered in thick brown fur. Rontal stood over 2 meters tall and had arms that could probably lift a small vehicle. But Jake noticed that the big guard moved carefully as if his back was bothering him. "You're the human," Rontal said when Jake reported for work. "Yes, sir. Jake Miller." Rontal looked him up and down. "You don't look so dangerous." "I try not to be dangerous unless I have to be." The guard snorted, which sounded like a steam engine releasing pressure. "All prisoners say things like that." Jake nodded and went to work checking the plants. The hydroponics bay was one of the more pleasant areas of the prison. The air was cleaner because of the plants, and the lighting was more natural. Several other prisoners worked at different tasks around the bay. During the lunch break, Jake sat by himself again. The 3 Kythera prisoners were at their usual table, but today they looked even more distressed than before. One of them was shaking so badly that he could barely hold his food container. Jake recognized the signs. The Kythera were suffering from severe anxiety, probably made worse by the stress of prison life. He had seen similar symptoms in miners who had been trapped underground for too long. He walked over to their table slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Excuse me," he said in Galactic Standard. "Are you feeling all right?" The 3 Kythera looked up at him with their large eyes. The one who was shaking managed to speak. "We are fine, human. Please leave us alone." "You look like you might be having panic attacks," Jake said gently. "I used to work with people who had similar problems. There are some simple techniques that can help." The second Kythera clicked nervously. "Why would you want to help us?" "Because you're suffering, and I might be able to help reduce that suffering." The 3 insects looked at each other, communicating in rapid clicks. Finally, the first one spoke again. "What kind of techniques?" Jake sat down carefully, making sure not to move too quickly. "Breathing exercises and meditation. They help calm the nervous system when it gets overloaded by stress." "Meditation?" The third Kythera sounded skeptical. "You mean religious practices?" "Not religious. Just mental exercises that help you control your body's stress responses." Jake demonstrated a simple breathing pattern. Like this. Breathe in slowly for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Breathe out slowly for 4 counts. The Kythera watched him carefully. After a moment, the shaking one tried to copy the breathing pattern. Within a few minutes, his trembling had decreased noticeably. "It helps," he said with surprise. Jake taught them several more breathing exercises and a basic meditation technique he had learned during his mining safety training. The Kythera practiced eagerly, clearly desperate for any relief from their anxiety. From across the room, Jake noticed that guard Rontal was watching them. The big bear-like being seemed confused by what he was seeing. Over the next few days, Jake continued working in the hydroponics bay and helping the Kythera with their anxiety management. Word spread quickly through the prison that the human was teaching something that actually helped people feel better. Soon, other prisoners began approaching Jake for help with various problems. A group of reptilian beings from a desert world were suffering from the cold, humid conditions on the station. Jake taught them exercises to improve circulation and ways to layer their clothing more effectively. An elderly prisoner from a low-gravity world was having trouble with the station's heavy gravity. Jake showed him strengthening exercises that would help his bones and muscles adapt without causing injury. Each time Jake helped someone, Guard Rontal watched from a distance. The big guard's expression was getting more and more confused. On the 5th day, Rontal approached Jake during a work break. "What are you doing?" he asked bluntly. "Helping people adapt to the conditions here," Jake replied. "Prison is stressful enough without being physically uncomfortable too." "But why? What do you get from it?" Jake considered the question seriously. "I feel better when the people around me feel better. It makes the whole place more peaceful." Rontal scratched his furry chin. "That makes no sense. Prisoners are supposed to compete with each other. It's survival of the strongest." "Maybe," Jake said. "But I've found that cooperation usually works better than competition when everyone is facing the same difficult situation." That afternoon, Rontal pulled Jake aside privately. "I have a question for you, human." "Yes, sir?" The big guard looked uncomfortable. "My back hurts all the time. The medical staff says there's nothing wrong, but the pain makes it hard to work. Do you know anything about back problems?" Jake nodded. "Back pain is very common, especially for people who stand and walk a lot during their job. May I ask what the pain feels like?" Rontal described his symptoms. Jake listened carefully, asking questions about when the pain was worse and what positions provided relief. Based on the answers, Jake suspected that Rontal's problem was muscle tension caused by poor posture and stress. "I might be able to help," Jake said, "but I would need to show you some exercises and stretches. It would take several weeks of daily practice to see improvement." Rontal looked skeptical. "You would help a guard?" "I would help anyone who was in pain and wanted help reducing it. Why should I trust you? You could be planning to hurt me when—" "My guard is down," Jake shrugged. "You're carrying a weapon and you're twice my size. If I wanted to hurt you, I would find a much better opportunity than when you're expecting me to touch your back." Rontal thought about this for a moment. "That's true. What kind of exercises?" Jake demonstrated some basic stretches that could be done while wearing guard equipment. He explained how tight muscles in the legs and hips could cause back pain and how certain movements could help release the tension. Rontal tried the stretches awkwardly at first, but after a few minutes, his expression changed. "The pain is less," he said with surprise. "It will come back," Jake warned. "These exercises need to be done every day for several weeks before the improvement becomes permanent. And you might need to change some of your daily habits to prevent the problem from returning." Over the following weeks, Rontal practiced the exercises Jake taught him. His back pain gradually improved and his mood became noticeably better. Other guards began to notice the change. Guard Captain Veloth approached Jake in the hydroponics bay one morning. "Rontal says you helped fix his back pain." "I taught him some exercises that can help reduce muscle tension. He did the work of practicing them." Veloth's crystalline features reflected the grow lights in interesting patterns. "He also says you've been teaching meditation to the Kithara prisoners. Breathing and relaxation techniques. They were having severe anxiety problems." "No. We were considering moving them to isolation because their panic attacks were disrupting other prisoners." Veloth paused. "They haven't had a panic attack in over a week." Jake nodded. "The techniques take some practice, but they're very effective for managing stress." "Where did you learn these things?" "Mining is dangerous work. Companies that want to keep their workers alive teach stress management and basic medical care. I also had some training as an emergency responder before I became a miner." Veloth was quiet for a long moment. "These techniques you're teaching, could they help other species besides humans and Kithara?" "The basic principles work for most species. The specific methods might need to be adjusted for different body types and nervous systems." Would you be willing to teach them to the guards? Jake looked up from the plant he was tending. If you think it would be helpful, yes. That evening, Veloth brought 3 other guards to see Jake. One was Nyx Ara, the young guard Jake had helped during the riot. Her leg had healed well, but she still walked with a slight limp. Show them the breathing exercises, Veloth said. Jake demonstrated the basic techniques he had taught the Kithara. The guards practiced awkwardly at first, but they began to understand how the exercises could help manage stress during difficult situations. This could be useful during riots, one of the guards observed. Help us stay calm and think clearly. That's the idea, Jake replied. When your body is relaxed, your mind can focus better on solving problems. 2 weeks after the riot, Jake was moved to a different cell block. Chief Warden Zektar had decided that Jake was not as dangerous as his file suggested. The new cell was in Block 3, where prisoners were allowed more movement and some social interaction. Jake's first day in Block 3 started with breakfast in the common area. He carried his tray to an empty table and sat down quietly. The other prisoners stared at him but kept their distance. Word had spread about the human who had helped a guard during the riot. At the table next to him sat 3 insectoid beings from the Kithara species. They were small, about the size of human children, with thin arms and large compound eyes. Jake could hear them talking in their clicking language, but he also noticed that they seemed very nervous. Their hands shook as they tried to eat, and they kept looking around the room as if expecting danger. After breakfast, Jake was assigned to work detail in the station's hydroponics bay. The work was simple, checking water levels and nutrient mixtures for the plants that provided fresh food for the prison. Jake found the work relaxing after years of dangerous mining operations. Guard Ron Tal supervised the work detail. He was from a species that looked like giant bears covered in thick brown fur. Ron Tal stood over 2 meters tall and had arms that could probably lift a small vehicle. But Jake noticed that the big guard moved carefully, as if his back was bothering him. "You're the human," Ron Tal said when Jake reported for work. "Yes, sir. Jake Miller." Ron Tal looked him up and down. "You don't look so dangerous." "I try not to be dangerous unless I have to be." The guard snorted, which sounded like a steam engine releasing pressure. "All prisoners say things like that." Jake nodded and went to work checking the plants. The hydroponics bay was one of the more pleasant areas of the prison. The air was cleaner because of the plants, and the lighting was more natural. Several other prisoners worked at different tasks around the bay. During the lunch break, Jake sat by himself again. The 3 Kithara prisoners were at their usual table, but today they looked even more distressed than before. One of them was shaking so badly that he could barely hold his food container. Jake recognized the signs. The Kithara were suffering from severe anxiety, probably made worse by the stress of prison life. He had seen similar symptoms in miners who had been trapped underground for too long. He walked over to their table slowly, keeping his hands visible. "Excuse me," he said in Galactic Standard. "Are you feeling all right?" The 3 Kithara looked up at him with their large eyes. The one who was shaking managed to speak. "We are fine, human. Please leave us alone." "You look like you might be having panic attacks," Jake said gently. "I used to work with people who had similar problems. There are some simple techniques that can help." The second Kithara clicked nervously. "Why would you want to help us?" "Because you're suffering, and I might be able to help reduce that suffering." The 3 insects looked at each other, communicating in rapid clicks. Finally, the first one spoke again. "What kind of techniques?" Jake sat down carefully, making sure not to move too quickly. "Breathing exercises and meditation. They help calm the nervous system when it gets overloaded by stress." "Meditation?" The third Kithara sounded skeptical. "You mean religious practices?" "Not religious. Just mental exercises that help you control your body's stress responses." Jake demonstrated a simple breathing pattern. Like this. Breathe in slowly for 4 counts. Hold for 4 counts. Breathe out slowly for 4 counts. The Kithara watched him carefully. After a moment, the shaking one tried to copy the breathing pattern. Within a few minutes, his trembling had decreased noticeably. "It helps," he said with surprise. Jake taught them several more breathing exercises and a basic meditation technique he had learned during his mining safety training. The Kithara practiced eagerly, clearly desperate for any relief from their anxiety. From across the room, Jake noticed that guard Rontal was watching them. The big bear-like being seemed confused by what he was seeing. Over the next few days, Jake continued working in the hydroponics bay and helping the Kithara with their anxiety management. Word spread quickly through the prison that the human was teaching something that actually helped people feel better. Soon, other prisoners began approaching Jake for help with various problems. A group of reptilian beings from a desert world were suffering from the cold, humid conditions on the station. Jake taught them exercises to improve circulation and ways to layer their clothing more effectively. An elderly prisoner from a low-gravity world was having trouble with the station's heavy gravity. Jake showed him strengthening exercises that would help his bones and muscles adapt without causing injury. Each time Jake helped someone, Guard Rontal watched from a distance. The big guard's expression was getting more and more confused. On the 5th day, Rontal approached Jake during a work break. "What are you doing?" he asked bluntly. "Helping people adapt to the conditions here," Jake replied. "Prison is stressful enough without being physically uncomfortable too." "But why? What do you get from it?" Jake considered the question seriously. "I feel better when the people around me feel better. It makes the whole place more peaceful." Rontal scratched his furry chin. "That makes no sense. Prisoners are supposed to compete with each other. It's survival of the strongest." "Maybe," Jake said, "but I've found that cooperation usually works better than competition when everyone is facing the same difficult situation." That afternoon, Rontal pulled Jake aside privately. "I have a question for you, human." "Yes, sir." The big guard looked uncomfortable. "My back hurts all the time. The medical staff says there's nothing wrong, but the pain makes it hard to work. Do you know anything about back problems?" Jake nodded. "Back pain is very common, especially for people who stand and walk a lot during their job. May I ask what the pain feels like?" Rontal described his symptoms. Jake listened carefully, asking questions about when the pain was worse and what positions provided relief. Based on the answers, Jake suspected that Rontal's problem was muscle tension caused by poor posture and stress. "I might be able to help," Jake said, "but I would need to show you some exercises and stretches. It would take several weeks of daily practice to see improvement." Rontal looked skeptical. "You would help a guard?" "I would help anyone who was in pain and wanted help reducing it. Why should I trust you? You could be planning to hurt me when—" "My guard is down," Jake shrugged. "You're carrying a weapon and you're twice my size. If I wanted to hurt you, I would find a much better opportunity than when you're expecting me to touch your back." Rontal thought about this for a moment. "That's true. What kind of exercises?" Jake demonstrated some basic stretches that could be done while wearing guard equipment. He explained how tight muscles in the legs and hips could cause back pain, and how certain movements could help release the tension. Rontal tried the stretches awkwardly at first, but after a few minutes, his expression changed. "The pain is less," he said with surprise. "It will come back," Jake warned. "These exercises need to be done every day for several weeks before the improvement becomes permanent. And you might need to change some of your daily habits to prevent the problem from returning." Over the following weeks, Rontal practiced the exercises Jake taught him. His back pain gradually improved, and his mood became noticeably better. Other guards began to notice the change. Guard Captain Vel Oth approached Jake in the hydroponics bay one morning. "Rontal says you helped fix his back pain." I taught him some exercises that can help reduce muscle tension. He did the work of practicing them. Veloth's crystalline features reflected the grow lights in interesting patterns. He also says you've been teaching meditation to the Kythera prisoners. Breathing and relaxation techniques. They were having severe anxiety problems. No. We were considering moving them to isolation because their panic attacks were disrupting other prisoners. Veloth paused. They haven't had a panic attack in over a week. Jake nodded. The techniques take some practice, but they're very effective for managing stress. Where did you learn these things? Mining is dangerous work. Companies that want to keep their workers alive teach stress management and basic medical care. I also had some training as an emergency responder before I became a miner. Veloth was quiet for a long moment. These techniques you're teaching, could they help other species besides humans and Kythera? The basic principles work for most species. The specific methods might need to be adjusted for different body types and nervous systems. Would you be willing to teach them to the guards? Jake looked up from the plant he was tending. If you think it would be helpful, yes. That evening, Veloth brought 3 other guards to see Jake. One was Nixara, the young guard Jake had helped during the riot. Her leg had healed well, but she still walked with a slight limp. Show them the breathing exercises, Veloth said. Jake demonstrated the basic techniques he had taught the Kythera. The guards practiced awkwardly at first, but they began to understand how the exercises could help manage stress during difficult situations. This could be useful during riots, one of the guards observed. Help us stay calm and think clearly. That's the idea, Jake replied. When your body is relaxed, your mind can focus better on solving problems. Jake spent 4 days in the medical bay recovering from radiation exposure. Dr. Lyra monitored him constantly, fascinated by how well his human body was handling the damage. What would have killed most species had only made Jake sick for a few days. On the 5th day, Jake was well enough to sit up and eat solid food. Dr. Lyra brought him a tablet with some reading material, technical manuals and news updates from around the galaxy. But what surprised Jake was the visitor who came with her. Dr. Kess was the station's psychiatrist, an elderly being from a species Jake had never seen before. She looked somewhat like a cross between a bird and a reptile, with feathers that changed color slightly as she moved. Her large eyes seemed to see everything, and when she spoke, her voice was gentle and calming. I hope you don't mind, Dr. Kess said as she settled into a chair next to Jake's bed. I wanted to speak with you about what happened. Are you here to evaluate my mental state? Jake asked. In part, yes, but mostly I'm here because I'm curious about you. Dr. Kess arranged her colorful feathers and looked at Jake directly. In 40 years of working in prisons, I have never seen a prisoner risk his life to save the institution that was holding him. Jake thought about this. When you put it that way, it does sound strange. Very strange. Most prisoners, even the ones who aren't violent, would see a reactor failure as an opportunity to escape in the chaos. At minimum, they would expect some kind of reward for helping. I didn't think about rewards, Jake said honestly. I just thought about all the people who would die if someone didn't fix the problem. Dr. Kess made notes on a small device. Tell me about your life before you came here. Jake found himself talking more openly than he had in months. Dr. Kess was an excellent listener, asking questions that helped him remember details he had almost forgotten. He told her about growing up on Earth, about his training as an emergency responder, about his work in the dangerous mining tunnels of the outer colonies. You chose dangerous professions, Dr. Kess observed. Mining, rescue work. Why? Someone has to do those jobs, Jake replied. And I was good at them. I could handle the physical stress and stay calm in emergencies. But there are safer ways to make a living, Jake shrugged. Safe jobs don't usually involve helping people who are in immediate danger. I found that kind of work satisfying, I guess. Dr. Kess's feathers shifted to a different shade. Tell me about the day of the explosion. Jake's expression became more serious. He described the mining facility on Centauri 7, where humans and several alien species worked together to extract rare minerals. He had been the safety coordinator for the human workers, but he also tried to help the alien teams when he could. The gas leak started in Tunnel 12, Jake said. The detection systems weren't working properly because of a magnetic storm. I was doing routine inspections when I smelled the gas. What did you do? I tried to evacuate everyone. But the Centauri workers in that tunnel didn't understand my warnings. Their translator system was having problems with the interference from the storm. Jake described how he had run through the tunnel, shouting warnings in broken Centauri standard and using hand signals to try to get the workers to leave. But the gas concentration was building up quickly, and he knew an explosion was coming. I triggered the emergency blast doors to contain the explosion to that one tunnel, Jake continued. It was the only way to save the workers in the other tunnels. But the 12 workers in Tunnel 12, they were killed in the explosion you caused, Dr. Kess said gently. The explosion I caused to save 60 other workers in the adjacent tunnels, Jake corrected. But yes, 12 people died because of my decision. Dr. Kess was quiet for a long moment. That must have been an impossible choice. It was the only choice that made sense. 12 deaths instead of 72. Jake's voice was steady, but Dr. Kess could see the pain in his eyes. But when the investigation started, the survivors thought I had triggered the explosion on purpose. The translator problems made my warnings sound like threats. And you were convicted of terrorism. The evidence looked bad. A human from a Class 15 Deathworld working with dangerous explosives, triggering a blast that killed alien workers. The prosecutors said I was a terrorist trying to drive alien workers away from human colonies. Dr. Kess made more notes. But you never tried to explain what really happened? I did try. But my lawyer said it would be better to accept a plea bargain. Life in prison instead of execution. Jake looked out the small window in the medical bay. I thought life in prison was better than no life at all. Do you regret that decision now? Jake considered this carefully. Sometimes, but if I had been executed, I wouldn't have been here to help during the reactor crisis. 70 people would have died from radiation poisoning. So maybe things worked out the way they were supposed to. Dr. Kess's feathers shifted again. This time to a warmer color. That's a remarkably positive way to view your situation. Getting angry about things I can't change doesn't help anyone, Jake said. I'd rather focus on what I can do to make things better. Over the next few days, Dr. Kess visited Jake several more times. She asked detailed questions about his background, his training, and his motivations. Jake found their conversations helpful. It was good to talk to someone who listened without judging. On Jake's last day in the medical bay, Dr. Kess brought someone with her. Deputy Warden Kolma was a tall, thin being with gray skin and large black eyes. Jake had seen him around the station but had never spoken with him directly. Deputy Warden Kolma has some questions about your case, Dr. Kess explained. Kolma sat down and pulled out a thick file. I've been reviewing your conviction records, he said in a precise, careful voice. There are some things that don't make sense. Jake sat up straighter. What kind of things? The evidence presented at your trial. The timeline doesn't match the physical facts of the explosion. Kolma opened the file and showed Jake several documents. According to the blast analysis, the explosion happened exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds after the gas leak was first detected by the emergency sensors. That sounds right, Jake said. But according to the testimony of the survivors, you were seen triggering the blast doors at least 5 minutes before the explosion occurred. Jake thought back to that day. The emergency sensors weren't working properly because of the magnetic storm. I detected the gas leak by smell several minutes before the sensors picked it up. Kolma made notes. So you were actually trying to prevent an explosion, not cause one? Yes, But by the time I realized the blast doors wouldn't stop the gas buildup, it was too late to evacuate everyone from Tunnel 12. According to the technical specifications, those blast doors should have contained a gas explosion of that size, Kolema continued. The fact that they didn't suggest there was already structural damage to the tunnel. Dr. Kess leaned forward. Structural damage that Jake wouldn't have known about. Kolema nodded. I've requested the original engineering reports from the mining company. If there was pre-existing damage that made the tunnel unsafe, and if the company knew about it, then they might have used me as a scapegoat to avoid responsibility for the deaths, Jake finished. It's possible, Kolema said carefully. I need to investigate further before I can draw any conclusions. Jake felt a strange mix of hope and fear. After so many months of accepting his fate, the possibility of proving his innocence seemed almost too good to believe. Why are you investigating this now? Jake asked. Kolema's black eyes reflected the light strangely. Because your actions during the reactor crisis don't match the behavior of a terrorist. A terrorist would have used the emergency as an opportunity to cause more damage, not risk his life to save others. Also, Dr. Kess added, your psychological profile doesn't match someone capable of mass murder. You show strong protective instincts and genuine empathy for others. These are not traits commonly found in terrorists. Kolema closed the file. I'm going to request copies of all the original evidence from your trial. This investigation may take several months, but if you were wrongly convicted, I want to know. After they left, Jake lay back on his medical bed and stared at the ceiling. For the first time since his arrest, he allowed himself to hope that someday he might be free. But even more important to him was the possibility that the real truth about what happened on Centauri 7 might finally come to light. Dr. Lyra came in to check on him one more time before his release back to the general population. How are you feeling? She asked. Better, Jake said. Much better. The radiation exposure? Jake smiled. That too. But I was talking about something else. That evening, Jake was returned to Cell Block 3. As he walked through the corridors, he noticed that both guards and prisoners looked at him differently now. Some nodded respectfully as he passed. Others just stared in amazement. In his cell, Jake found several small gifts left by other prisoners. A hand-carved chess piece from one of the Kythera, a small plant cutting from someone who worked in the hydroponics bay, a drawing that showed Jake in his radiation suit with the words, "Thank you," written in several different alien languages. Guard Rontal stopped by his cell that night. How are you feeling, Jake? Good. Ready to get back to work. Jake returned to his work in the hydroponics bay, but everything was different now. Word of his heroic actions during the reactor crisis had spread throughout the entire station. Prisoners who had never spoken to him before now approached him, with questions and requests for help. The change was most obvious during mealtimes. Instead of sitting alone, Jake found himself surrounded by prisoners from many different species. They wanted to learn the breathing exercises he had taught the Kythera. They asked for advice about adapting to the station's harsh conditions. Some just wanted to sit near him, as if his presence made them feel safer. Guard Captain Veloth watched these developments with fascination. I've never seen anything like it, he told Chief Warden Zektar during their daily briefing. The violence incidents have dropped by more than half since Jake started interacting with the general population. Explain, Zektar said, his 6 arms working at different control panels. Prisoners are resolving conflicts through discussion instead of fighting. They're helping each other with problems instead of taking advantage of weakness. It's like Jake is teaching them a completely different way to live together. Zektar's golden eyes focused on Veloth. One human is changing the behavior of hundreds of prisoners? Not just prisoners. The guards are changing too. Rontal has been teaching other guards the exercises Jake showed him. 3 guards have asked to learn the meditation techniques. Morale is higher than it's been in years. The warden considered this information carefully. Show me the incident reports for the past month. Veloth displayed the data on the main screen. The numbers were remarkable. Violence between prisoners was down 70%. Medical emergencies from stress and despair had decreased by half. Even minor rule violations were becoming less common. "How is this possible?" Zektar asked. "I think Jake is showing everyone that there's a different way to handle difficult situations," Veloth replied. "Instead of fighting or giving up, he looks for solutions that help everyone." Meanwhile, in the prisoner common area, Jake was helping to establish what the prisoners were calling the Council. It started when two groups of prisoners got into a dispute over access to the recreation equipment. Instead of letting it escalate into violence, Jake suggested they sit down and talk through the problem. Each group should explain what they need and why, Jake said to the gathering of about 20 prisoners. "Then we can figure out a schedule that works for everyone." The Kithara prisoners, who had been much calmer since learning Jake's anxiety management techniques, offered to speak first. Their representative, a small insectoid named Clicks, stood up nervously. "We need access to the exercise equipment during the quieter hours," Clicks explained. "Our species gets overwhelmed by too much noise and activity. If we try to exercise when many others are there, we have panic attacks." The second group consisted of large, aggressive-looking beings from a high-gravity world. Their leader, a massive creature named Grex, had initially wanted to simply take the equipment by force. But Jake's influence was changing how conflicts were handled. "We need the equipment during the times when we're not working," Grex said. "Our work shifts are different from the insectoids." Jake helped both groups map out their schedules and find times that worked for everyone. Within an hour, they had an agreement that satisfied both sides. More importantly, they had learned a new way to solve problems. "This is amazing," said Dr. Kess, who had been observing from a distance. She approached Jake after the meeting ended. "You've created an actual functioning democracy among some of the galaxy's most dangerous criminals." "I just helped them talk to each other instead of fighting," Jake replied. "Most conflicts can be solved if people are willing to listen and compromise." Over the following weeks, the council grew and became more organized. Prisoners brought disputes to the group instead of settling them with violence. They developed rules for sharing resources and managing common spaces. They even created a system for helping new prisoners adapt to life on the station. The guards initially watched these developments with suspicion. Organized prisoner groups usually meant trouble. But this group was different. Instead of planning escapes or revolts, they were making life better for everyone. Guard Training Officer Bethara was particularly impressed by the changes. She was from a species that valued tactical thinking and efficient organization. The way Jake had helped the prisoners create structure from chaos reminded her of advanced military leadership techniques. "I want to incorporate some of his methods into our guard training program," she told Captain Veloth. "The way he handles crisis situations and manages group dynamics could be very useful for our staff." Veloth nodded. "What specifically do you want to include?" "His approach to de-escalation. Instead of using force first, he talks people through problems. He finds solutions that address the real causes of conflicts, not just the symptoms." Bethara had been observing Jake's interactions with both prisoners and guards for weeks. She noticed that he never raised his voice, never threatened anyone, and never made promises he couldn't keep. Yet people listened to him and followed his suggestions. "He has natural leadership abilities," she continued. "But more than that, he has the trust of both prisoners and guards. That's almost impossible to achieve in a prison environment." The changes in the prison were becoming impossible to ignore. Chief Warden Zektar found himself dealing with fewer disciplinary issues, fewer medical emergencies, and fewer requests for prisoner transfers. The station was running more smoothly than it had in years, but perhaps the most significant change was in the guards themselves. They were beginning to see prisoners as individuals with problems to solve, rather than threats to contain. This shift in perspective was changing how they approached their daily duties. Guard Nick's Aura, whose leg Jake had helped during the riot, was now leading efforts to improve prisoner living conditions. "If we can reduce the stress and discomfort that causes most behavioral problems," she argued, "we'll have fewer serious incidents to deal with." She had convinced the administration to improve the air filtration in several cell blocks and to adjust the lighting cycles to be less harsh. Small changes, but they made a noticeable difference in prisoner mood and behavior. Dr. Lyra, the medical officer, was also seeing positive changes. "Stress-related illnesses are down significantly," she reported. "Prisoners are taking better care of themselves and seeking help earlier when they do have health problems." Jake's influence was spreading beyond just the prisoners he directly interacted with. Prisoners were teaching Jake's techniques to other prisoners. Guards were sharing his problem-solving approaches with their colleagues. The positive changes were multiplying throughout the station. One afternoon, Jake was approached by a group of prisoners he had never spoken with before. They were from a species he didn't recognize: tall, pale beings with very large eyes and thin limbs. "We have heard about your council," their spokesperson said in careful Galactic standard. "We would like to join, but we are afraid we have nothing to contribute." Jake sat down with them in the common area. "Everyone has something to contribute. What are your people good at?" The pale beings looked at each other uncertainly. "We are good at remembering things. We can remember conversations exactly as they happened, even years later." "That sounds very useful," Jake said. "The council often needs to remember what was decided in previous meetings, or what promises were made. Would you be willing to serve as record keepers?" The being's large eyes brightened with interest. "You would trust us with such an important responsibility?" "Why wouldn't I? You're the ones with the skill for the job." Within a few days, the pale beings had become integral members of the council. Their perfect memory made meetings more efficient and helped prevent disputes about what had been agreed upon. More importantly, they felt valued and included for the first time since arriving at the prison. Similar stories were happening throughout the station. Jake helped a group of elderly prisoners organize a teaching program, sharing knowledge from their various home worlds. He encouraged aggressive prisoners to channel their energy into organizing sports competitions instead of fights. He helped shy prisoners find ways to contribute to the community without having to speak in large groups. The transformation was so dramatic that it came to the attention of the Galactic Prison Authority. Inspector General Tarnway arrived unannounced for a surprise evaluation of the station. Tarnway was from a species known for their strict adherence to rules and procedures. He expected to find the usual problems: violence, despair, overcrowding, and constant tension between guards and prisoners. Instead, he found prisoners working together on improvement projects. He saw guards and prisoners having actual conversations, instead of just giving orders and following them. He observed dispute resolution meetings where problems were solved through discussion rather than punishment. "This is highly irregular," Tarnway told Chief Warden Zektar. "Prisoners are not supposed to be organizing themselves into governing bodies. The organization is entirely voluntary and focused on improving living conditions for everyone," Zektar replied. "Violence is down, medical costs are down, and guard efficiency is up. By every measurable standard, the station is performing better than ever." Deputy Warden Kolma had been working on Jake's case for 3 months when the breakthrough finally came. He was reviewing security footage from the mining facility on Centauri 7 when he noticed something that had been overlooked during the original investigation. The timestamp on one of the videos was wrong. Kolima sat in his office late at night, surrounded by files and data displays. He had requested copies of every piece of evidence from Jake's trial, and what he was finding troubled him deeply. The more he investigated, the more convinced he became that a serious mistake had been made. He activated his communication device and called Dr. Kess. "I need you to look at something," he said. Dr. Kess arrived 20 minutes later, carrying a cup of hot liquid that smelled like flowers. She had been working late, too, preparing psychological evaluations for several new prisoners. "What did you find?" she asked, settling into a chair across from Kolema's desk. Kolema displayed the security footage on his main screen. This video shows Jake triggering the emergency blast doors. According to the timestamp, this happened at 14:23 station time. "That matches the testimony from his trial," Dr. Kess said. "But look at this." Kolema brought up a second video feed from a different camera. This shows the gas leak detection alarm being triggered. The timestamp shows 14:31. Dr. Kess leaned forward, studying the screens carefully. "Jake triggered the blast doors 8 minutes before the leak was officially detected?" According to these timestamps, yes. But that's impossible, unless Jake knew about the leak before it happened. Kolema switched to a third video. But this footage from the tunnel entrance shows Jake running toward the leak area, not away from it. He's clearly responding to an emergency, not causing one. Dr. Kess's feathers shifted to a troubled color. So either Jake has the ability to predict the future or the timestamps on the security system were corrupted, Kolema finished. "I've been analyzing the metadata from all the video files. There was a magnetic storm affecting the colony's computer systems on the day of the explosion. The same storm that disabled the gas detection sensors." Kolema brought up a technical analysis of the video files. "Look at this. The timestamp data shows signs of digital corruption. The real sequence of events was different from what the corrupted timestamps suggested." "How different?" Kolema created a timeline on his screen, arranging the events in their correct order. Jake detected the gas leak first, by smell. He ran to evacuate the workers in the affected tunnel. When that failed because of the translator problems, he triggered the blast doors to contain the explosion. 8 minutes later, the automated systems finally detected the leak and sounded the alarm. Dr. Kess studied the timeline carefully. "So, Jake was trying to prevent the explosion, not cause it." "Exactly. But the corrupted timestamps made it look like he triggered the blast doors before there was any detected reason to do so. That's what convinced the jury he had planned the explosion." Kolema pulled up another file. "I also found the engineering. Reports that were supposed to be presented at Jake's trial, but somehow got lost in the legal system. The tunnel where the explosion occurred had structural weaknesses that made it unsafe for gas storage." Structural weaknesses that Jake wouldn't have known about? The reports were classified as company confidential. Only the senior engineering staff had access to them. Kolema's black eyes reflected the screen light. But here's the interesting part. 3 days after Jake was convicted, the mining company's safety director was promoted to vice president and given a large bonus. Dr. Kess's feathers shifted to an angry red color. Someone used Jake as a scapegoat to cover up their own negligence. That's what it looks like. The company avoided responsibility for the deaths by blaming a human terrorist instead of their own safety failures. Kolema had spent weeks tracking down the original investigators and prosecutors from Jake's case. What he found was a pattern of rushed decisions and ignored evidence. The explosion had happened during a time of rising tension between human colonies and alien settlements. Everyone wanted to find a human terrorist to blame. The prosecutors were under political pressure to get a conviction quickly, Kolema explained. A human from a Class 15 Deathworld, working with explosives, triggering a blast that killed aliens. It fit the narrative they wanted, even though the evidence didn't really support it. The evidence was confusing because of the technical problems caused by the magnetic storm. Rather than taking the time to sort out what really happened, they accepted the simple explanation that confirmed their expectations. Dr. Kess stood up and paced around the office. "We have to tell Jake about this." "I agree, but I also want to present this evidence to the Galactic Tribunal. Jake deserves a formal declaration of innocence, not just our private knowledge of the truth." The next morning, Kolema and Dr. Kess went to find Jake in the hydroponics bay. He was working with a group of prisoners to expand the growing area, teaching them about plant biology and sustainable agriculture. "Jake," Kolema said, "we need to speak with you privately." Jake could tell from their expressions that this was serious. He asked the other prisoners to continue without him and followed the two officials to a quiet corner of the bay. "I've completed my investigation of your case," Kolema said without preamble. "You were wrongly convicted. The evidence clearly shows that you tried to prevent the explosion, not cause it." Jake sat down heavily on a workbench. After months of hoping, the news still came as a shock. "You're certain?" "Absolutely certain." Kolema explained about the corrupted timestamps, the hidden engineering reports, and the evidence of corporate negligence. "You're not a terrorist, Jake. You're a hero who saved 60 lives and got blamed for the 12 you couldn't save, Doctor." Kess sat down next to Jake. "How do you feel about this news?" Jake was quiet for a long time. "Relieved," he said finally. "For so long, I wondered if I could have done something different, if I could have saved everyone somehow." "You did everything." "Right," Kolema assured him. "The deaths were caused by corporate negligence and equipment failure, not by anything you did wrong." "What happens now?" Jake asked. "I'm presenting this evidence to the Galactic Tribunal with a request for immediate review of your conviction. The case is so clear that they should overturn the verdict within a few weeks." Jake nodded slowly. "And then I'll be free to leave?" Kolema and Dr. Kess exchanged a look. "That's more complicated," Dr. Kess said gently. "You've been in prison for almost a year. You'll need time to readjust to life outside. And frankly, your work here has been so valuable that we hope you'll consider staying involved in prison reform." "I don't understand." Kolema pulled out another file. "Inspector General Tarnway has recommended that the methods you've developed here be implemented throughout the galactic prison system. The prison authority wants to offer you a position as a rehabilitation consultant." "You mean work in prisons voluntarily? Help other facilities learn the techniques you've pioneered here. Teach guards and administrators how to reduce violence and improve conditions for prisoners." Jake looked around the hydroponics bay, where prisoners and guards were working together on projects that would have been impossible when he first arrived. "Would I be able to help design better systems? Make prisons more effective at actually rehabilitating people instead of just warehousing them?" "That would be exactly your job," Dr. Kess confirmed. "And I could travel to different facilities, work with different species and cultures." "As much as you wanted to," Kolema replied. Jake smiled for the first time since receiving the news of his innocence. "That sounds like the kind of work I'd like to do." Word of Jake's vindication spread quickly through the station. Chief Warden Zektar called an assembly of all prisoners and guards to make the official announcement. "Prisoner Jake Miller has been found innocent of all charges," Zektar announced to the gathered crowd. "He will be released immediately with a full apology from the galactic justice system." The response was unlike anything ever seen in a prison. Guards and prisoners applauded together. The Kithara prisoners clicked their appreciation. The large prisoners from high-gravity worlds roared their approval. Even the usually reserved pale beings who kept the council records showed their joy. But Jake raised his hand for quiet. "Thank you all for your support," he said. "But I want you to know that what we've built here together is more important than any individual. The council, the cooperation between guards and prisoners, the way we've learned to solve problems together. That's bigger than any one person." Guard Captain Veloth stepped forward. "What Jake has taught us will continue long after he leaves. We've all learned that there are better ways to handle conflict and better ways to treat each other." Guard Ron Tall, whose back pain was now completely gone thanks to Jake's exercises, spoke up. "Jake showed us that strength doesn't come from violence or dominance. Real strength comes from helping others and building trust." Dr. Lyra, the medical officer, added her thoughts. "The health improvements we've seen, physical and mental, prove that treating people with dignity and respect has real, measurable benefits." Jake felt overwhelmed by the responses. "You've all taught me things too," he said. "About different cultures, different ways of thinking, different approaches to problems. Working together. The official release ceremony took place in the main assembly hall of Void Station Alpha. Jake stood before Chief Warden Zektar, wearing civilian clothes for the first time in over a year. The clothes felt strange after so many months in prison uniform, but they also felt like freedom. "Jake Miller," Zektar announced formally, "by order of the Galactic Tribunal, you are hereby cleared of all charges and released from custody with the full apologies of the justice system." The assembled crowd of guards and prisoners applauded. But Jake's attention was focused on a communication screen at the front of the room. On the screen was a face he had not seen since his arrest. His sister Lisa, calling from Earth. "Jake." Lisa's voice came through clearly despite the vast distance. "We always knew you were innocent. We never stopped believing in you." Jake felt tears starting in his eyes. "I'm sorry it took so long to prove it." "You have nothing to apologize for," Lisa replied firmly. "We're proud of what you've accomplished. The reports about your work at the prison have reached Earth. People are calling you a hero." "I'm not a hero," Jake said. "I just tried to help where I could." "That's exactly what makes you a hero," Lisa smiled. "Mom and Dad would have been so proud of you." Jake's parents had died in a mining accident while he was in prison. He had not been allowed to attend their funeral, which had been one of the hardest parts of his imprisonment. After the ceremony, Jake met with officials from the Galactic Prison Authority. They offered him a formal contract as a rehabilitation specialist with the authority to visit any prison facility in the galaxy and implement reform programs. "The position comes with full freedom of movement and a substantial salary," explained Director Mornax, a high-ranking official from the prison authority. "You would report directly to the central office, but your methods and approach would be entirely up to you." Jake reviewed the contract carefully. "I have some conditions." "Name them." "First, I want to be able to bring teams of guards and former prisoners with me to help train staff at other facilities. The people here at Void Station Alpha have learned these methods as well as I have." Director Mornax made notes. "Acceptable." "Second, I want to be involved in designing new prison facilities from the ground up. The physical environment affects behavior. Better designed facilities will be more effective. Also acceptable. Third, I want protection for any prison staff who implement these reforms. Some administrators might resist changes that reduce their authority or challenge traditional methods." Director Mornax nodded slowly. "That will require careful handling, but we can provide institutional support for approved reforms." Jake signed the contract, officially beginning his new career. But before he could start traveling to other facilities, he had one more task to complete at Void Station Alpha. Over the following weeks, Jake worked with the guards and prisoners to create a comprehensive manual of everything they had learned together. The manual included detailed instructions for establishing prisoner councils, techniques for conflict resolution, methods for improving physical and mental health, and guidelines for creating cooperation between guards and prisoners. Guard Captain Veloth led the team that documented the guard training procedures. "These methods should be taught in every guard academy in the galaxy," he said as they worked on the manual. "The old ways of using force first and asking questions later don't work as well as building trust and solving problems together." Dr. Kess contributed sections on psychological support and mental health maintenance. "Prison doesn't have to be a place where people get worse," she wrote. "With the right approach, it can be a place where people learn to make better choices and develop better coping skills." The prisoners, led by the council, created sections on self-governance and community building. Clix, the Kithara representative, worked with the Pale Beings who kept records to ensure every technique was accurately described. "We want other prisoners to know that they can change their situation," Clix explained. "Even in the worst circumstances, people can work together to make things better." As word of Jake's work spread throughout the galaxy, requests for his services began arriving from dozens of different worlds. Some facilities were experiencing riots and wanted to learn conflict resolution techniques. Others were dealing with high suicide rates and needed better mental health approaches. A few were simply interested in reducing operating costs by improving efficiency. Jake's first assignment after leaving Void Station Alpha was at a maximum security facility on Kepler Station, orbiting a gas giant in the Vega system. The prison housed over 3,000 inmates from 15 different species, and violence was a daily occurrence. When Jake arrived with his team, including Captain Veloth, Dr. Kess, and 3 former prisoners from Void Station Alpha, they found a facility in crisis. The warden, a stressed military officer named Colonel Brixtor, met them at the docking bay. "I hope you can help," Brixtor said without preamble. "We've had 18 deaths in the past month. The guards are requesting transfers and the prisoners are on the edge of full revolt." Jake and his team spent 3 days observing the facility before making any recommendations. What they found was exactly what Jake had expected, a cycle of violence and mistrust that fed on itself. "The problems here are systemic," Jake explained to Colonel Brixtor and his senior staff. "The guards see prisoners as enemies to be controlled. The prisoners see guards as oppressors to be resisted. Both sides are trapped in patterns of behavior that make everything worse." "So what do you recommend?" Brixtor asked. "We start by breaking the cycle. Small changes that prove to both sides that cooperation is possible and beneficial." Jake's first intervention was simple, but effective. He arranged for guards and prisoners to work together on a practical project, repairing the facility's failing air circulation system. The work required both technical knowledge from the guards and physical labor from the prisoners. At first, both sides were suspicious and hostile, but as they worked together toward a common goal, attitudes began to change. Guards discovered that many prisoners had valuable skills and were willing to help solve problems. Prisoners learned that not all guards were cruel or unreasonable. Within 2 weeks, the air quality in the facility had improved dramatically. More importantly, guards and prisoners had successfully completed a project together without violence or conflict. "How did you know this would work?" Colonel Brixtor asked Jake. "Because people want to feel useful and respected," Jake replied. "When you give them a chance to contribute something positive, most people will take it." Over the following months, Jake's team implemented the full program they had developed at Void Station Alpha. They established prisoner councils, trained guards in conflict resolution, improved living conditions, and created systems for addressing grievances through discussion rather than force. The results were dramatic. Violence at Kepler Station dropped by 80% within 6 months. Medical costs decreased significantly as stress-related illnesses became less common. Guard morale improved as their jobs became less dangerous and more rewarding. But perhaps most importantly, the facility began actually rehabilitating prisoners. Instead of simply warehousing criminals until their sentences were complete, the prison became a place where people learned better ways to handle problems and interact with others. Jake's success at Kepler Station led to more requests than he could handle. The prison authority created an entire department dedicated to implementing his methods, with Jake as the director. His team grew to include specialists from dozens of different species and worlds. 5 years after his release from Void Station, Alpha Jake was recognized as the leading expert on prison reform in the galaxy. He had personally visited over 200 facilities and had trained thousands of guards and administrators. Violence in galactic prisons had decreased by an average of 70%, and recidivism rates had fallen to historic lows. But Jake's proudest achievement was a new prison facility he had designed from the ground up on Titan Station in the outer reaches of the Sol system. The facility looked more like a college campus than a traditional prison. Instead of cells, prisoners lived in small apartments. Instead of guards, there were counselors and teachers. Instead of punishment, there was education and skill development. "This is what prisons should be," Jake explained to a group of visiting officials. "Places where people learn to make better choices, not places where they're simply punished for past mistakes." The success of Titan Station led to similar facilities being built throughout the galaxy. The traditional model of prisons as places of punishment was gradually being replaced by Jake's vision of rehabilitation and community building. On the 10-year anniversary of his wrongful conviction, Jake returned to Void Station Alpha for a celebration. The facility had become the model for prison reform throughout the galaxy, and many of the guards and prisoners he had first worked with were now leaders in the reform movement. Chief Warden Zektar, now promoted to Director of Prison Innovation, welcomed Jake back with full honors. "This place where you were once wrongly imprisoned has become the birthplace of a revolution in how we treat people who have made mistakes." Jake stood in the assembly hall where he had once been introduced as a dangerous terrorist.